Coffee this morning downstairs with the meditators, and it reminded me of a British officer who was posted to Nigeria, and he was very renowned for the lovely coffee he served at his parties. So one day his guests had to know how the coffee's done, so they sent for the cook, this native cook, and so they asked him how to make coffee. He says, boss, we take water, boiled water with milk, and then I put in the coffee. So they asked, because in Nigeria you don't get the fine coffee we get here, it's a very rough coffee. And so he says, how do you strain the coffee? So the native cook replies, I use my boss's silk socks. So here the officer got very angry, and he said, what? You use my best socks? So the servant was terrified. He says, boss, me, no use. You're talking of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Nirvi means not, kalpa means thought. The Samadhi that takes a person beyond thought. Now, with that question, another question could be asked, what is true experience? What is the highest experience that a person can reach? And I will tell you emphatically. And this is a revolutionary idea that the greatest experience is no experience. Because all experiences are confined to the mind. Now, in a person's daily life, you have all kinds of experiences, good ones, nasty ones, and grosser ones and subtle ones. So only there in the realms of the mind is experience involved. So a gross experience is from the conscious or grosser level of the mind, and a more subtle experience can be obtained through the subconscious, and the subtlest, the refined is relative to be experienced through the superconscious mind. And the superconscious mind, all these three facets or aspects of the mind are totally interrelated. And that is why the experience of the superconscious mind, the subconscious mind, can achieve some recognition by the conscious mind, which in turn translates itself through the body. The body, mind is interconnected. There is no dividing line between the body and the mind. If I ask you, where is your mind? You could never say it in my big toe or in my head. For you are the mind, and when we look at it from the bodily aspect, then we are sure to know that the subtleness of the mind, which is also matter, and mind doesn't matter, is translated through the body. So the body is also mind, and so the final analysis, you are the mind. And the interpretation or the living of daily life is conditioned by various factors of your sanskaras of how much that subtle level, superconscious level, will be portrayed and brought about in daily living. Now, when more and more through meditation and spiritual practices is brought about to the body, which translates itself into action through our five senses, hearing, touching, seeing, smelling, tasting, then we have experience. The more one could bring out or draw out from the inner layers of the mind, the more so-called happiness is received, and that we call experience, a happy experience, a joyous experience, or if not, in between the force of that flow, there are negativities or veils blocking that flow, then the fullness of it cannot be felt, and that is why we find certain experiences to be negative or miserable or unhappy. Now, these are the mechanics of the mind, which psychologists are still trying to unfathom. But the supreme experience is no experience, because you could never be conscious of the supreme experience. When I go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, I am totally lost. I'm not conscious of the five senses. I'm not conscious of the mind in all these three aspects at all. And then I am in another sphere, the sphere of the spirit. And the spirit is not capable of experience. Only that which is limited is capable of experience, because experience too requires a comparison. You experience heat. How would you know you're experiencing heat if you cannot compare it with coldness? So here, in comparison between anything, you eat bland food or you eat curried food. Now, how would you know this is curried food if you cannot compare it with boiled food or the other way around? So here, what happens is this, that there is a duality. So only because of the duality, the dual existence of which the mind conceives, can one experience whatever experience there is to be had, be in this embodied being. While in the spiritual realm, when you merge into that which is beyond, then you are experienceless. It is the drop of water might experience itself falling down, to use an analogy, experiencing itself as falling down as rain. But when it falls into the ocean and merges with the ocean, then the experience of the drop is lost. There is no drop, so there is no individuality. So it becomes one with the ocean, and when the drop becomes one with the ocean, if the drop would talk, it will say, I am the earth. When the individual mind merges into the universal mind, and the universal mind merges into the spiritual reality, then there is no experience. Now the spiritual reality is what we call divinity. And divinity is devoid of any experience. For if divinity should experience something, then automatically the analytical process is brought in and it falls into limitations. While divinity is limitless, without limitations. Now, if something is totally unlimited, there is no sphere for it, for any experience. It just is. It just is. In that total unified state, which is beyond the conscious mind, beyond the subconscious mind, beyond the superconscious level of the mind. Now, most philosophies, including the Vedanta, go to that level of the superconscious mind where you experience absolute knowledge. Well, it's a combination of terms. Because knowledge is a quality of the mind, and how can it be absolute? Then they say absolute knowledge, absolute existence, another contradiction of terms, because existence interpreted by your mind can never be absolute. And then they talk of absolute bliss. Now, bliss is also something experienced by the mind, which is limited, so how can it be absolute? So the highest, which the highest philosophy can reach, is knowledge, existence, and bliss. But when we go to the field of nirvikalpa samadhi, then there is no existence, there is no bliss, there's no knowledge. You just are. And you'd be surprised to know that knowledge can be an impediment, an obstacle for you to merge away into the divine. For, as I said, and to repeat, because these are subtle points which require repeating, that exists, that divinity is beyond all experience. Therefore it knows of no knowledge, nor existence, or bliss. It is like electricity that does not know itself. And yet it's such a powerful force. But in its expression, it brings light, it brings coolness in the fridge or heat in the stove. So it becomes the manifestation, and it manifests itself into a grosser level, yet it not is the grosser level, and yet it is the grosser level too. Yes. So in the realm of mysticism or the spiritual field, this to the ordinary mind sounds very paradoxical. It says yes, it says no. For example, one of the injunctions in the Kena Upanishad says, the universe is unreal. Listen to this very carefully. Because the greatest minds in the world, minds, intellectualizing philosophers, have yet not been successful in interpreting it. Now this injunction says, the universe is real, the universe is unreal. Only God is real, and the universe is God. The universe is unreal, only God is real, and the universe is God. You see the paradox there? But it is really not a paradox. For reality and unreality both can coexist and interpenetrate each other. So our concept of the reality is a limited reality, and that which is limited is unreal, or it is forever changing. Only that which is changeless is real. But now that is the realm of metaphysics. But bring it down to physical existence. The best man can do is to draw upon the highest level of the mind and allow it to infiltrate the conscious mind and thereby joy and knowledge. That is not the end of that, the end of all. Nirvikalpa samadhi, we are totally unconscious of everything, and you just are. And the unconsciousness comes about with the drop of water merging away in the ocean. When you get upon the ocean, that which we see to be real are the bubbles. Many of the bubbles have their own reality in its own sphere, the erotosphere. But when the bubbles burst, or the waves subside, so the subsiding of the waves is the total emergence in the ocean, which means that the individual soul, the mental soul, the bodily soul, merges away in the spirit, and that is the final end one could achieve. And yet it is not an end, it is a beginning for the ocean, and you are the ocean then. Brings about waves, they make waves. And that is the unified state. You know, there was a young couple that got married and went to a hotel for a honeymoon. And so they in their room, beautiful, sweet. So, the mad husband says, "Oh, my darling, my beloved, at last we are really one." So the wife, while patting her curls, says, to be on the practical side, if we are really one, we should order dinner for two. Now, no man could ever live in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for more than 21 days. Your entire body will disappear. Because when you go into total unconsciousness, which is beyond the superconsciousness, then naturally, being devoid of consciousness, the body and the mind has to disappear. But we want to live in this bodily form. We take a trip in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for a while, a holiday away from the consciousness of life or the super consciousness or whatever. We go for a holiday and come back and be our normal souls. We enjoy the beautiful flowers and the trees and the birds and the bees and whatever goes in this world we exist. But coming from there, you are a totally different path. And the greatest result it could produce, all the talks I give come from not intellectualization, although one has to use the mind to express the inner self, although very, very inadequately. Everything I talk about comes from personal experience. And drawing from that infinite source, mind the people will be lucky enough that they can just draw from the superconscious, which is the quietest state of relative existence. But to draw from that which is beyond, then you can really live as a God on earth, a God-man. And yet, if you put it on a scale, the God will be heavier than man. In other words, you live more as the divine than as man. And yet you have all the characteristics of man. Enjoy a good meal, enjoy your Scotch and certificate, nightcap. Enjoy it. Nothing wrong with that. But you have the constant remembrance every second of your life that divinity is in you. You are divine. And because of that, you find a total unified state of all the existence as man knows it. Now, finding that total unified state, you become non-attached to the world, to be in the world but not of the world, as I've said many times before. And that is the secret of viewing the world in a different perspective, which we talked about yesterday. And then nothing can hurt you, nothing can harm you. If a man comes up to you and pierces a sword through you, you say, so what? Forgive them. For who has pierced the sword through me? I myself. But I am not apart from him. He is an expression in this turbulent, tumultuous world that is expressing itself in a different form. And that is why the Lord Jesus said, someone strikes you on one cheek, give the other. But who is the striker and who is the recipient of the slap? There's no difference. The actor and the action are but one. The thinker and the thought are but one. The creator and the creature are but one. Now, these are not things that should just be intellectualized with only reaches the level of mind. These are things that are beyond that level where the mind is not necessary. This was the merging away that ocean, that you support the waves, you support all the boats and the ships sailing on you. You energize everything in existence, relatively existing. You become the energy that gives life to existence. And that is the secret of Purusha. It's really deep, where although you possess a bodily form, and having been connected and experienced that non-experienced state, you can bring about through the mind and body experience and pass it on to those that could receive it. It's like what the Bible says about seeds. Some seeds are thrown on fertile land, some on barren land, and some on the rocks of the birds of the air. So they give again. How much can the receiver receive? None. When we do our meditations and spiritual practices, we become greater recipients of Guru Shakti, which is grace. Now, the only way to draw that grace is to become a good recipient. But if you are like a sieve, even though the grace is coming, it's just going to flow through. But when we are integrated, then we cease to be a sieve. And then we can contain that grace within ourselves and in life. I always try to take the highest physics and metaphysics to very practical levels, because that is what people need. There was a young man married, he had 2 children. And from morning till night, he was just involved in reading philosophical books and metaphysical books. He read all the ancient philosophers, Socrates and Plato and Pythagoras, all the Eastern ones, Yajnavalkya, Shankaracharya, all that. And from morning till night, he was busy with that. So his wife came to see me. Please speak to my husband. He's involved from morning to night in all these studies, and we are starving at home. There's no bread. And I spoke to this chap. I said, of course, this is divine. But how much have you been able to translate all those philosophies in day-to-day practical life? Are you doing your duties to you and yours and to the society that you live in? So it took me a bit of a while to convince him. And later when he started doing that, I was good knowledge that he has achieved, received, and worked for. He put into practice, and life became happy. But there were no squalls at all. So, Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the aim of everyone, of total emergence while still in this body. Now that must be filtered through, and it would very spontaneously through the channels of the superconscious mind, going through the subconscious mind, burning of the seeds of karma, as the expression goes, coming to the conscious mind, where all thoughts are just right. All actions, even without thinking about them, without analyzing them, are just right. You come to a fork in the road and you will just take the right road at the fork. So life becomes spontaneous as the flower is. Nobody prods it on to grow. In other words, you become yourself. And then only can one answer the question, for no one will answer it for you. Only can you answer the question, who am I? Now, if I tell you that the answer to the question of who am I is you are divine, but that makes no sense. I'll tell you you're divine. And then you will think in your mind, oh, Guruji says I'm divine. All the problems and things I'm doing, how can I be divine? My work scolded me for coming home late the other day, and this and that. And all the problems, the kids are rowdy and putting on the hi-fi, and I can't stand it. How can I be divine? You are divine, but because you have not recognized your divinity, you suffer all the surface waves of the ocean that you really are. Yes, we're talking about married life. Someone asked this young bride, how do you find married life? She says, no difference at all from when she was single. She says, every night I used to wait for George to go home. Now, every night I wait for George to come home. Yes. Nirvikalpa Samadhi is not something that can be explained or described. I can only tell you something about it. You can only it when you experience it. The experience of non-existence. The experience, as Carl Jung would say, the unconscious. Although, of course, he was very limited in his rationalization because this cannot be rationalized. I gave a lovely talk on the shortcomings of Carl Jung psychology. I gave a talk in America. You should really get a tape of it here. You find it very good, and I believe it has been published in the scientific journal. I did a talk at Vidyazone, and we had a lot of people there. And that's besides the point. So Nirvikalpa Samadhi is something that you cannot describe, but you can experience. Right. But what would be good, which can be lived in daily life, is Sarvikalpa Samadhi. The samadhi not in the non-existence, but samadhi in existence. In other words, samadhi with form. And all religions do that. Samadhi with form. where you formulate a certain ideal or whatever. It could be a piece of stone. Like, for example, the Hindus have the Shivalinga, the wall. It aids to the purpose of concentration. It aids to the purpose of becoming one-pointed. And if it is done in the form of Purusha, you draw to your soul that infinite force that flows through the channel. Electricity is there in the water, but we could never have it here without the concrete generator. Electricity in the water is abstract, but to draw that abstract to us, we need the concrete generator. And that is water. Buddha, Jesus Christ, all of the world, Krishna, all of the world, generator. So, having a bodied form, you can only be the generator. Because you're concrete and not abstract. But the generator is so powerful, it has the mechanisms there in that bodied form to draw that abstract power, that abstract electricity, and pass it on to us in our every room, in our every facets of our mind. The mind contains many rooms. But in this mansion, how many of the rooms are in such darkness? Perhaps one room has light. We have to light up all the rooms of the mind to feel the fullness of that beautiful mansion in the dark that even from a distance the faces of the like fairyland. Okay, what is the fairyland? This world. By lighting ourselves, we light up everything around us. And how do we light it up? Well, it's expressed through love. And that is how we love our neighbor as ourselves. For our neighbor is not a part of ourselves. Our neighbor is ourselves. And that is how all hatred disappears, animosities, the resentments will go away. And when these go away, what is left? Love and peace. Isn't that we want? For in the light of love and peace, that darkness of anxieties and distrust and animosities and resentments cannot exist. Darkness cannot exist in the presence of light. Yet it is there. But it is vanished by light. Yes. So when the mind is lightened up by drawing from the divine force, and yet everything is the divine force. Everything contains the divinity, and not only contains it, but it is. For that isness is universal. And yet it transcends the universe. Realize the crowning beauty of what we call divinity. So as man can be in the world and yet not of the world, divinity is also in the world and not of the world. You see the sameness. That man and God are so similar. He too is in you and yet beyond you. You two are in the world and beyond the world. So here, we can see in everything the same pattern follows, the same pattern follows. For example, like our concept of the Trinity. You can analyze anything and you'll find the Trinity there. The Hindus, for example, the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, creator, preserver, dissolver. In Christianity, we find the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And there's a Trinity in everything. There's a Trinity in the body, the mind, and the spirit. Anything we can analyze, we can bring it down to the Trinity. Yet, when we say Trinity, it does not mean three different things. It means three different aspects of the same thing. For God is man, God is in Jesus and Buddha, and Krishna is there. And when he is totally there, then we can say that he is God. And that is what we mean by incarnation. The incarnations of God are those that are filled, totally filled with the divine. All the rooms in the mansion of the mind are all lit up. And yet it can be so ordinary. I said a few times before, I don't know where, that if our Lord Jesus should walk down the road, he might be arrested for vagrancy. So whose fault is it? Our fault, but not being able to recognize. And to be able to recognize, we have to be at that high stature, to have enough awareness to bring in us the recognition of that which is divine. It is only, there's an Indian beautiful saying, that it is only the jeweler that knows the worth of a diamond. Someone else might pick it as a piece of glass. Yes. So therefore, it is our duty to ourselves, full of peace in ourselves, to find that integration. And I could never stop emphasizing the value of spiritual practices and meditation. Do you want me to edit which one, would you? I was written. You know, I have a friend who loves smoking cigars. Big ones, you know. I don't know if you see in the audience. He loves cigars. So I was, his birthday was coming. So I was speaking to his wife, and I said, what did you buy for your husband as a birthday present? So she says, 100 big cigars. I says, but that must be expensive. How much do you pay for it? So she tells me, nothing. Nothing for 100 big cigars. So she says, well, for the past several months, I've been taking out one or two funny cigars. I didn't notice it. So when I give it to him on his birthday, he'll be very delighted that I call the very brand he smokes. You know, this grand old lady was with a friend watching this parade going by. And this friend was from our country. So she says, well, there is the Duke and the Duchess in front. And behind them is the mayor and the mayoress. And if you look on the right-hand side, there is the vicar and the vixen. Don't think too much. It's really good place. Yes, this John Dinglebook, he tells his secretary, Smithers cancel all my engagements. And so after a while, when he phones through, he says, Smithers, did you cancel all my engagements? He said, I did, so I cancelled all your engagements. But Lady Millicent wasn't happy because she said you were supposed to marry her next week. Yeah. Yeah, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That's what I go into when I do the communion practice. Good. Now, that is the ideal stage. But it takes years, perhaps even lifetimes to reach that. And could we the present moment? So what we need is greater and greater things in life. What we need is to smooth out or iron out the wrinkles. And what could do that? Meditation, understanding, and both require some effort. And later you will find that at first, many times the person tells me, I can't sit down to meditate, Guruji. I should make some effort. And then later you will find that the effort becomes effortless. And you will look forward to the time to sit down and meditate. So effort becomes effortless. And in that effortlessness, you will find great activity happening within your soul on the subtle sphere. And then you will know the meaning of what has been said, to find action in action and inaction in action. Well, the greatest action is not necessarily a distraction. And that is only the grosser counterpart. But the greatest activity happens on a subtle level, inclined, where, especially in the subconscious mind, with the various sanskaras, forever are trying to balance themselves. So if any suffering comes about, remember it is very, very good. Because that very suffering represents an unconducive sanskara coming out of you. You shedding off. So therefore, it is not something to be sad about. The man on the spiritual path will say, come what may. For all is well, everything is good. Then suffering is nothing but an offering. We talked about this of acceptance and sacredness. So all our disappointments come about because of expectation. And expectations are mostly, if you analyze it closely, is nothing else but wishful thinking. I expect my son to be good to me, so I'm wishing for that. It's wishful thought. So expectation is another word for wishful thinking. Expecting means you are demanding a certain thing. I expect the customer to buy this overcoat and this rainy weather. The customer might not like it. Then you disappoint. So, by having greater and greater integration in us, we become non-attached, and because of non-attached, there is no expectation. We take life as it comes, for it is always for our personal evolution and for our benefit. Some people who are not apparently, but who are genuinely happy, remember that they have worked hard for it. Perhaps not in this life they've made effort, perhaps in a previous life. If I was a spiritual teacher, do you think it is all gained in this life? If I have become one with divinity, it's all in this one actor. No, there's so many hundreds of thousands of lifetimes might have been filled with effort. And likewise with everything else, with everything else. So despair, but a repair. The repair. To where you have to go to what you belong and to what you really are. Then you can love even those that wrong you. You love them. You don't even say a word against them. I've had this experience here in England, where people have taken my teachings and used it for their own means, very wrongfully, in a wrong way, for their own personal ego and selfishness, and back pockets. I love them, still. Nothing against them. Although, as a father, I could reprimand a child that you're doing wrong, my son. But it doesn't mean that I don't love them. That is how after all, whatever people are doing, all the churches and splinter groups and everything, after all, in their own way, and they're talking of God. They're talking of goodness, perhaps. And then whenever they do it with a selfish motive. As far as religions are concerned, the two most wealthiest institutions in the world is the church and insurance companies. The churches promise you heaven after you are dead, and the insurance promise you a lump sum of money after you are dead. I promise you peace here and now while you are living. No spiritual master can just wave a magic wand. You'll wave it, the energy is flowing to you, but are you doing your bit? Are you meditating? Are you trying to gain better and better understanding? Are you instead of reading cheap novels, reading good books, having good thoughts in the mind? Are you progressing gradually from negative feelings to positive feelings? And so on. These things are important. So, we were talking about hope yesterday. Hope is never lost. No one is hopeless. For everyone is embodied hope as the manifestation of the manifester. For the manifester could never bring a manifestation which is hopeless. Do you see the logic? You can only take out water from water. And what is the difference between the water in your bucket and the water in the well? Same water. Do you want the water in the bucket? From the well is the one that's applied the water or your bucket. Divinity is you, and you are divinity. You in an individual form, like in a small bucket, and the divinity in a universal form, like in the whole. It's just about intercession for somebody and how the one performs this, bearing in mind that God's will always is done. Good. Intercession is necessary, and this we have found in the lives of the great masters like Jesus, Buddha, and Krishna. Now, we say God's will is always done, but how many of us can really appreciate or know God's will? Now, an interceder is not one that goes and appeals on your behalf. The true meaning of that would be that he, having found the knowledge of divinity, conveys that knowledge to you. So therefore, he that knows God's will interprets that will to you. But your approach to him is always direct. There are certain theologies in the world, certain religions that would say that, for example, in the Gita, no one goes to the Father except through me. And Jesus says the same thing. What does that really mean? It means that he's not there going to, as an advocate or a barrister, appeal for you to divinity. No. It means that you have to reach the stage of Christhood. You first have to become one, but that is a very high mortal being, an embodied being. You have to reach that stage of consciousness before you can reach the stage of divine consciousness. Now that is the greatest duty that has been performed by all true teachers of divinity. And they lead you, and they have to be authoritative. You come to me. There is nothing wishy-washy about the great soul, the great being, he that has become one with God. He tells you authority because he has experienced that. So when he says, no one goes to the Father except through me, is very true. There have been many interpretations, and I can only give you mine. That you have to reach the consciousness of Christ in order to reach divinity. So we could call him the middleman. The middleman. In daily life, if you go from the street direct to a wholesaler, he won't sell you his wares, his goods. He'll tell you, no, we supply the retailer and you buy my goods through the retailer. So, and this has happened all along the ages. Now, when we talk of God's will, is that not also his will to bring into being such an entity? It is his will. And then what God are we talking about? Who knows God? How many have experienced God? It is said that out of 10 million people on the path towards divinity, perhaps 10 might reach. I see, I always say that I don't want to show you God, because that's a false promise. But I would say, let me put you on the path towards divinity, and you walk with your own feet. And if you're put on the path of the right direction, you will definitely reach that. There are some religions that would say that, okay, you come to me, right, I will pay your dues, and I will take you to God. Please shun them. For the true messenger of God, for the true incarnation that represents in physical form that which is divine, is worth going to. You can call him the middleman, the interceder, or whatever title. But when a man has become one with God, then truly he could be the greatest representative or God incarnate walking on earth. So, these theories or theologies are not wrong. They're all true. They have a deep meaning. But All people, most people, 99.9% of people misinterpret these things. It is not to him, but through him, that you realize your own personal divinity. For you come from nowhere and you're going nowhere. If that which we call divinity is omnipresent and all existent, eternally so and infinite, then you are that too. For the eternity of that which is divine can never exist without you being eternal. And we keep on saying, I get born and I die. What gets born? What decays? And what dies? This little bubble, this little physical body, how important is it? In the eternity of things. When we talk of eternity as time measureless, which means in turn timeless, while man is bound by time because his emphasis is on the little body, the little mind, which is here today and not there tomorrow. And not there tomorrow meaning is not here as well. For where is the difference between here and there? What is here and what is there? We only say here and there because we know only of time and space. Now, time and space and the causation of it are in reality, from the absolute viewpoint, non-existent. So, if I would say, you are non-existent, it would seem blasphemy. It would seem, you say, look, I can feel and touch myself and can feel pain and pleasure, and I can walk and I can communicate. But who is saying that? The unreal you, which is transitory, and anything transitory could be termed non-existent. But is the real self that is you saying that? No, for the real self is beyond time, beyond space, and nothing causes it. And that is why it is it. So when we talk of God's will, what will are we talking about? Because the supreme divine, the supreme divinity has no will. The supreme divinity has no will. But the divinity man is talking about, he is the force which makes up the whole universe, or in other words, the personal God. I was speaking to that person this afternoon in an interview. That we call the personal God. No. The personal God exists. He is the sum total of the emanations of this universe. And that when an incarnation comes, that sum total of the universe takes on a body. But that sum total of the universe that takes on a body is still totally aware, experientially aware of that which is beyond the sum totality of the universe. So, we have the personal God, which man needs. Because when you go into the realms of the impersonal God, you are in the field of the unconscious being. When you just are, as I explained, this morning. But the personal God that has to take bodily form, he is worthy of our love, devotion, and worship. When we realize he is totality, then we know the truth when he said, I and my Father are one. That I, that embodied I, is the totality of the universe. And the personal God knows or is merged within the impersonal God. The impersonal God is an energy. It has no will. It can be used. So, the primal manifestation from the impersonal energy through various natural forces constituted the personal God, Christ and the Father. You can see that. Now, the totality of the universe, that force, in turn, grossified itself through various processes of evolution, through the black hole process, for example. For this universe, too, is endless. It never ends, but it works in cycles. While the impersonal entity, if we could call it an entity, does not work in cycles, it just is that. Now, when the kind of balance comes about in the universe, then it dissolves with Shiva. It dissolves and is drawn back within itself. The entire universe is drawn back within itself, in which we term the black hole. But as it goes into the black hole, certain very fine vibrations remain. And because of these fine vibrations within the black hole, it has to explode out again. In from one end, then out at the other end. And there, again, the process of evolution starts, and another universe comes about. And then right from the primal atom through these various processes, I've spoken about this before, to reach the stage of thinking man. So, here the question says, God is love, and love is truth. Love must contain wisdom. This is very true. Now, God is love. That is not that all-pervading eternal essence or energy called the impersonal God. For that just remains an energy. But what expresses love is the totality of this universe. So when we say God is love, we are talking of the personal God. If we talk of that Brahman, or that fine energy always existent, without having to go through cycles, that knows of no love. That knows of no love. But the personal God, he is the one that is all love. Now, what do we mean by this love? The personal God has the universal mind, because he is the sum totality of the universe. Right. And therefore, it is love. And through that universal mind, the love that he is or gives is not conditional, and neither it is by volition. It is its nature. And how does it express its nature? It is the development of the psyche. That is why, right from the primal self, one progresses to the human stage through various kingdoms. And that very process is the love of God. That very process is the love of God, because it is forever taking you back. Forever taking you back home from where you have originated. And that is why we say God is love. It's not a figure sitting up there in heaven, throne, long beard. I love you myself, I love you. Come on. The process is love. And how much we become aware of the process, so much do we become aware of love. And then we in turn express that love because we are aware of the process. So the entire existence is nothing else but a process. And in the process, we are forever proceeding to greater and greater awareness of what is going on in this motion. But what we do, we understand more of commotion than motion. Yes, motion is peaceful. Commotion is peaceful. Commotion is not. But we use motion to create commotion, and that is done by the small mind. And that is why we want to meditate to reach the highest superconscious level of the mind, where even the motion, though being motion, be so still, like a highly spinning top, spinning so fast that to us it would seem very still. So, these are things to understand, and then otherwise it will just be a saying. Everybody says that God is love and love is God. Just verbal words, and nothing understood. So the love of God is the process, and the very process is God. High ties of nature. But even there too, in this process, there is a system. No process can come about haphazardly. And because the process cannot come about haphazardly, we call it God's will. That is. Now we are involved in this process, which is God's will. Therefore we say that we are governed by God's will, which is very true. Which is very true. We're involved in this process. We are involved in His love. Now, when there is love, it has to have its opposites. Hate. Where does hate come from? There in reality is no hate. There is no hate at all. It is the misinterpretation of love which is termed to be hate. As we all know, the difference between love and hate, it has a very thin dividing line. You can love someone very much now, later, because of misinterpretation. So by the little mind, it can turn to hate. So, hate is an idea. If God is love and God is the universe, where is the place for hate? There is no hate. Hate is an idea because using only a fraction of the mind, using only the conscious mind, and the conscious mind with its ego self wants everything conducive to itself and says that I am the center of the universe. And when it says the I, it does not mean the real I, but the ego I. And the ego I is forever grasping, is forever trying to preserve itself in whatever way, by hook or crook. It wants to preserve itself. And when things does not come its way, then he changes the energy of love into hate and projects it onto others. And that's what he thinks. That's what the ego thinks, that I hate someone. The ego so finds an object of the hatred. But where does the hatred really stem from? It stems from the subject. So I am the hate then. The ego self is the hate. And that is why we lose sight of the true meaning of this will of God, and God is love. So what do we do with the ego self, the stumbling block? People say annihilate it. I say don't keep it. It's good. For without self-identity, which the ego self brings about, how can you have, without knowing self-identity, how are you going to know the universal identity, which is God? So, preserve the ego self, but refine the ego self. It would be foolish for a person to say, I was Jack, I'm not Jack anymore. I am now the universe, and runs around like a madman. Therefore, we have had madmen coming into this world saying, I am God. You really are. But have you realized that yet? Have you realized that universal soul? Have you encaptured that universal God within your soul to say, I am He? And that is why people like Hitler are born. To boost the ego. So that which we must refine is made much, much, much more gross. So we become attachment. We actually go back instead of going forward. So God is that's church. I've got yes, you know these two friends went out public crawling, as they say in England, and they got quite well inebriated. In other words, drunk. So they were going home. And as one friend says to the other, look, Jack, come in for a cup of black coffee, it'll make you feel better. So this friend consented, and they went to the front door. So here, John was fumbling around with a key. So Jack asks, can't you find the key? So says my friend, I found the key, I've got the key, but I can't find the lock. It was a Yale lock. Yes. So we, in our sense, believing that we are it all, preserving the ego self, are really intoxicated in that. It's better to have the intoxication within the universal self than in the ego self. It gets in the way. Right. So, through meditation and spiritual practices, one refines the ego self so that the higher self within oneself can shine through. So, meditation and spiritual practices is a cleansing process. It is a preparation, and then illumination will dawn. First, the stage of Sarvikalpa Samadhi, which we spoke about this morning, where you find the I and thou, you find the universal God, and you find your small little I, and you learn to discriminate between the small I and the universal I. And then with furthermore practices, the small I becomes so clarified that the force and light of the higher I, some call it the oversoul, shines through. And yet, while you're embodied, the ego self will exist, but in a clarified, refined form. So that is what is called emergence, not throwing away or discarding or annihilating the ego I. You cannot do that. If you annihilate the ego I, you won't be able to walk, talk, or perform any biological functions. But the permeation comes not from yourself to the higher self, but if the small self is cleansed and the higher self automatically comes. So you don't merge into God, God merges into you. By giving you, and you know it, you become conscious of it, and life becomes peaceful and more smaller. And when that happens, the step after that, to merge away like the drop of water in the ocean into the Brahman, the impersonal God, just becomes automatic. Now what happens with these incarnations is this, that they can merge away any time they wish to merge away. But they, being the emanation of the entirety of the universe, they do still have desire. And the desire is to come back again and again, age after age, when they are needed. Evil rises when there's an imbalance. They come again and again to show the vast universal truths which have always existed. They've done nothing new but put universal truths in a way that the times would be able to understand it. Is wisdom automatically gained when true love is reached? Yes. When true love is reached, in this mergence with the small I to the big I, then that brings about love. And love is something spontaneous. Love is something spontaneous, and it is something that cannot be defined, but experienced. For we can talk about what it is about it, but not about what it really is. So when this emergence comes about, then you are automatically merged with wisdom. Well, that process is the wisdom. Or how else can the process carry on? That is wisdom itself. So when a person truly knows love, then wisdom is automatic. Now, the next question is, what is the difference between knowledge and wisdom? There's a great difference. Knowledge is mostly acquired. One can read 1,000,000 books and acquire a lot of knowledge as university professors do. But that is something acquired, gained from outside, which most times burden the mind with useless knowledge too. For when we reach wisdom, we don't need knowledge. Because knowledge always contains the elements of logic, rationalizations, analytical. But when we reach the stage of wisdom, then it just flows from inside. It just flows. You put the mind aside, that which could carry wisdom, for you do not operate from that level. All knowledge is centered in the left hemisphere of the brain. But wisdom pours forth from the right hemisphere of the brain. The right hemisphere of the brain is the part that has that intuitional value to it. It has that part is so connected to the universal mind. So this is another thing meditation does, so that it connects up the right hemisphere to the analytical left hemisphere by creating a greater synaptic force. Now that is why our thinking from the left hemisphere becomes more and more powerful, more concentrated. Well, that's another thing which meditation and spiritual practices do. So in other words, it brings about this wholeness where the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere can function in its fullest capacity together. And then the left hemisphere, although being rationalistic, only becomes an interpreter. And that is how wisdom flows through from deep inside via the intuitive levels of the right hemisphere. And then because of the wonderful conjunction that exists, because of spiritual practices, it filters through the left hemisphere, analyzes it, and interprets it to those that hear. These are the mechanics. So all worship is good. All worship is good because through worship, when the mind is not one that would want to analyze, then worship is done, devotion is brought about, and through that, without analyzing it, you touch upon the right hemisphere, and through that you go deeper to the intuitive levels of the mind. Okay. Also a young suitor. A young suitor one day asked his girlfriend's little brother, I said, would you like to earn some pocket money? And so the young lad says, yes. What must I do? He says, look, I'll give you 50p. if you can bring a lock of hair from your sister. So the youngster says, look, if you give me £2, I'll bring the whole wig. These newlyweds were getting off a station, and when they got off the train, the bride says to her husband, yes, look, in front of all these people, we don't want to appear as newlyweds. Let us do something so people will think that they married a long time. So he says, well, okay, that's easy. You carry the suitcases. Widow, it was in last week's paper, a report that in Derby, a widow with 9 children married a widow with 7 children. And the commentator says that this wasn't a marriage, it was a merger. And one theory was expounded that a man with long hair would look very intellectual. So this friend says that my wife found a long hair on my coat and I looked a perfect ass. The wife was reading the papers and she says, oh, all this business about trial marriages, isn't it horrid? The husband says, I don't know. And she says, do you believe in trial marriages? He says, well, in a way I do. She says, aren't all marriages a trial? There was this businessman. He made a fortune. So a friend asked him, how did you make a fortune? Well, he says, I became a partner of a very rich man. He had the money and I had the experience. He says, but how did that help you? He says, well, now he has the experience and I have the money. He's I think that's really an honor. It's fine. Time for supper. This was a very profound question. This was very, very from Jyotirma Copenhagen.